Back on LinkedIn with Ray O'Hara. Ray, we've been talking about a lot of things, and we're into the 30s with our posts. I think this is going to be like 33 or 34, something like that. And we've been talking a lot about how do you get the job, but we want to kind of transition that into now you've gotten the job. And we've talked about resumes. We've talked about doing your due diligence on these companies and understanding the interview process. What else have we talked about that's important to kind of recap here?
Well, I'll tell you what, though, it's been fun along the way. We've learned a lot. We've talked to a lot of people, and hopefully, at least by some of the feedback that we've got, or most of the feedback we've got, it's been very positive. And there's someone was telling me the other day they applied for a job in Augusta, Georgia, and I'll let the non-golfers figure out what's there. But hundreds of resumes. And so
Wow,
we've talked all about how do you get yours to the top of the table and what have you. But
that's right.
I think another transition topic that's pretty interesting is now that you've got the job, what do you do now? And so we're going to chat a little bit about that today. And there's some lessons to be learned there. And probably the one thing that we probably start reiterating, Scott, is that you've done some research, what you could do before you were an employee, but now that you're an employee and, maybe you're in a brand new position, or maybe you're in a replacement position, or maybe you're in a mid-level manager position. So I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think that matters that much. I mean, clearly, if you're the top person, that's a little bit different, but um, I think the one thing that Scott and I agree on is some kind of a 30, 60, 90-day action plan or,
Yep.
some numbers. And I think Scott would want to embrace that a little bit more, and then we'll talk in a little bit more detail about that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, because a lot of things happen in those first 90 days. You know, also with your program, I think you're making a great point here. If you're coming into an organization in kind of a maintenance role, or hey, we want to grow this program, or there's a program to embrace, that's way different to your point than to coming in and be like, we've had nothing. We hired you because you're the expert, and good luck. You may have a budget, you may not have a budget, you may have resources and support, you may not. I've heard of people who've been to big brand companies that if I said the brand, you'd know who I was talking about. And they were hired as the head of security, and he was besides being the head of security, he was programming doors and responding to alarms in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
That there's all levels. Some companies are more mature than others with their security programs. What have you seen? What are some of the weird iterations that you've seen? And maybe I'm missing one.
Yeah, no, that's actually pretty interesting because clearly there was a lack of research on that part
Thank you. Yeah.
about roles and responsibilities. I can recall one friend of mine who was really he was recruited heavily uh, by a very well-known company, and he kept saying no, and they kept saying yes, and he kept saying no, and so finally he sat down with them one day and said, "Okay, I'm going to accept this job, but here's are the 10 things that I want to accomplish in the first period of time."
Okay.
So they put it down on a piece of paper and they all agreed to it. And of course, 30 days later, number one went away, number two went away. And he lasted, he really only, it was really pretty amazing. It was a great job, but he lasted about 3 months and he said, "This is not for me.
Mm.
We agreed to this and these are strategic items." And, it's unfortunate that it fell apart like that, but, he held his position. And I think, today with so many people out of work, that might be a little bit aggressive
Yeah.
in,
It's tough.
in making demands. But if you could easily come up with a 30, 60, 90 plan or whatever numbers you want based on what you know before you started. And you could give some idea of here are the things that are important, physical, logical, whatever the case may be. But I think what's critically important is getting around to the senior team, whatever that means, whether that's your boss and his or her peers, or the senior management team. And, and all companies are different, so you have to figure this out. But another one of my friends, I thought he did a great job. He stepped into a new role, replacing a CSO and what have you. So he ventured off into meeting as many managers or vice presidents, whatever the level,
Sure.
as he could, and he generally asked them the same three questions. Something like, "What keeps you up at night?" Could
Yep.
how can security be an enabler in the industry, in the organization? How do you make money? And then maybe the what keeps you up at night might be the lead in, just to get some general conversation. But then if you measure that across, say there's 10 or 12 senior managers, and now you've got a pretty good picture of what they think about
That's
the
right.
security organization, and I'm sure you agree with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would imagine, and I love the three questions. Those are right, perfect, that every security leader should know going into the interview process. Let alone, now that you're onboarded and you're in-housed and you're the person who's going to be taking over these responsibilities. And I think identifying kind of who those key leaders are, and then when you're asking those questions, I'm sure there's going to be some level of those leaders wanting to know, like, is there, if especially if there's a sense of urgency around, we've had a crisis, or we're in a crisis, or we
Right.
identified that there are big issues for them, that maybe in security they may want to solicit, like, hey, what are you going to do? How are you going to save us? But I think to those three questions, really speaking to the point of listening more than asking additional questions or follow up, or trying to give your ideas about, hey, this is how I think we can save this project, this program, this company, whatever it is. Especially in that 30-day window, not having, quote unquote, the answers to everything, to every ill that they might have, because different companies approach problem solving differently.
That's right.
And I definitely saw that in the difference between Facebook and NVIDIA in my transition, even though the roles that I did at each company were completely different. It was really educational for me to, when I got to Facebook, to be listening more than I was speaking, especially with the dynamic there. Their dynamic is kind of a team dog pile on a problem, where it was just different in NVIDIA. They didn't have those kinds of resources. Facebook, tremendous resources. So everybody wants to come and play and try and figure out the answer to a problem. The thing that I experienced though at Facebook is there was a lack of ownership or steerage to the problem solving. It was kind of like everybody wants to put in their 2 cents, but nobody really wanted to be like, okay, what's next? How do we set up this to solve this project or problem? So that was my experience.
Yeah, so I've always told friends of mine that have got new jobs, try not to do a damn thing for 6 months. You know,
Yeah,
just try to figure out who's who, where the power players are, because I think it's all too easy, and all of us could do this. We could be there a week and we could say, well, this needs to be fixed and that needs to be fixed. Oh, we should fire this and fire that. But the reality of it is, you have no idea who embraced that.
that's
And,
right.
if people say, well, I need to go hire a deputy in their first month, and think, so you're not focusing on learning the company. Now, maybe you need a deputy, but is that going to embrace the organization for the reason that they hired you? And then you get distracted by trying to find that deputy and hiring and and all of that. And I really believe the 6 months is like, if you can avoid it, try not to do anything. Now that has a couple of different replies, because then you say, well, then they think I'm not doing anything. Well, yeah,
That's
but if
right.
you've got your written 30, 60, 90, or whatever it is, then you have some strategy items in there. And maybe they spend $10 million on security. Well, what is that?
Right.
What is that? What does it do? Who authorized it? And then you can't go fire Joe Blow, because he might be related to somebody
That's
in the
right.
company. Now that's unusual for things like that to happen, but in our
It
industry,
does though. Yeah.
we're just a little bit more open-minded than maybe some others. But I think, that it's really getting to see where you're sitting at the table of where the power is,
Yeah.
right?
I think it's also important when you said 6 months, I was thinking that's 2 quarters. You're going to have quarterly reporting as a public company, so on and so forth. It's also important to understand your budget, and you're not necessarily going to understand what all the nits and gnats of your budget within 30 days or even in 60 days. So giving yourself time to learn, there's especially if you have a mature or a legacy security program, because there are appliances that you're paying for, monthly things that your subscriptions you're paying for, licensing, seats, vehicles, uniforms. Who knows? I mean, a myriad of things that you're paying for, and you may not understand holistically when you first land. What are those things and how are they affecting? If I say, to your point, this person's not performing to our level. I've heard complaints. Let's go ahead and get rid of that person. That person could have been a key person who knew all the passwords to your LinkedIn profile and your Twitter profile. And, like that, I've been in that seat, not to terminate somebody like that, but I've been in the seat where somebody moved on from the organization and we were like, oh, a couple of weeks later, somebody goes, "Oh, that person had all the passwords." So you
Yeah.
just don't know. Another thing that I like about your idea in 30, 60, 90 is if you spend that first 30 days never in your office, but always moving about and I know in COVID world we're on Zoom, but if you could spend less time on email and in your office and more time out there on the street
Yeah.
talking with people, some people equate it to being a politician, and where you've got to kind of go out there and shake hands and kiss babies and do those kind of political things, meet with people and talk with people. In your mind, though, is there a position that's a key person that you've got to talk to within a certain time period, a key constituent that you have to kind of go out there and make sure you meet within a certain time period?
Well, clearly, whoever was the champion for the position, if you can figure that
Great
out,
term. Yeah,
that's important. And for whatever reason, that person is the champion. And then there's the general counsel for people like us. That's always a good place. The risk
great.
manager that has insurance and policy and kidnap and all that kind of stuff. But I think going back to culture a little bit, we're in this disruptive period, and we laugh about this now. But someone would say, "There is no way you'll find me sitting in the back seat of somebody's car," several years ago. And so today, that's so commonplace, it's unbelievable
Right.
that the Ubers and the Lyfts and whatever they're called tomorrow. You
Right.
got DoorDash and Instacart and on and on and on. And this, because of COVID, we're living in this food to go world. But the real question might be, were we ready for that before COVID, or is it as a result of COVID? So then you start thinking about this disruptive technologies that are out there today, and maybe you're in one of them. Maybe you're in that environment, and it's pre-IPO and what have you, and the rules I think are not necessarily different. They're just in a different category. They're all there, but if you back up to that champion and his or her colleagues of who started this process, I think you'll be in a good spot to find out who your allies are. And then if you're in a publicly traded company, you need to identify who's on the board of directors
That's right.
and see, maybe somebody from Boeing is on there. Well, then all of a sudden, you have a counterpart at Boeing that you could use for some networking and benchmarking and what have you.
That's right. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of reaching across the aisle, if you will, to another company and being like, hey, we have the same kind of important people that are on our boards or in our companies, and seeing how you can be collaborative. Hey, I had a complaint from a board member. Our officers wore black 511 pants that had cargo pockets, and she thought that looked too militant, too militaristic. totally legitimate concern. We could take that in, but we didn't realize that until she said something. Great, let's get some feedback. We can now make a decision based on that, and we could pivot to or away from things. But those are the kind of conversations that you should be seeking out to understand what the issues are. Same thing with vehicles. I'm talking about a lot of guard centric things, but the fact when somebody who is important says something, people in the company will listen, and so you're going to get that feedback coming back at you at 100 miles an hour, whether you're new or you're salty and you've been there for years. It's coming back at you, and the more that we can do, I think, as professionals, to kind of be forward leaning. To your point about great contact at Boeing, you reach out to the Boeing folks and be like, hey, give me some insight into these people or this person. And they can say, oh, you know what? They really don't like being driven around. So they don't want to see security, or they kind of expect security to meet them at the door. I mean, I've had both of those kind of conversations. So I think those are great points there. Any last points on 30, 60, 90 that you think are like we haven't hit on and we definitely need to talk about?
Well, I think I just reiterate what you said, because it's very important to be the listener, and especially in the environment that we're in today with with the disruptive technologies and everything else. I mean, so just a quick story. One of my friends finally got approval for optical turnstiles, and they had a lot of buildings, so there was a lot of money on the table. So they installed one or two, and they got a new CEO. And he meets with the new CEO in the first few weeks of that person's role. And she said, I just want you to know that I don't like the optical turnstiles. And fortunately, he said, oh, thank you for the feedback, and didn't say anything else. So he goes away and he comes back again for another meeting with the CEO several weeks later. And it started with, if you're here to defend the optical turnstiles, I'll listen, but I'm just reminding you I don't like them. He said, oh, no, that's not why I'm here at all. They're on their way out. So, he listened, and he
took action.
And, in our mind, in our idea, how could you live without optical turnstiles? But yet, in this particular case, it was, and that was feedback that was coming from the employees to the CEO. So the listening is, we may not agree with it, but we're going to figure it out.
Yes, definitely. Well, I mean, that's the thing. And just for the listeners at home that are thinking about transition, turnstiles are a big deal with a company, because many times you have to actually break concrete and run cables under the floor to set those things up. And they're not cheap. And there's a software package that goes to them. I mean, there's just so much. So I was cringing on the inside as you're telling me this story, because I've been there. The amount of capital that you have to secure as a security leader before you can even start on a project like that is tremendous. So great story. Great way to end this segment. We're going to have more segments. We're going to keep talking about once you have transitioned, you've obtained the great role, and how can you stay resilient? How can you help the company stay resilient? And how can you be successful? We're going to talk more about that, Ray, so stay tuned.
All right. Take care.